Hey, everybody, it is my honor to introduce Oakland City Auditor Michael C. Houston. Sir, welcome. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. I'm doing well.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
I know don't have a lot of time at all. First of all, what a report. You've really got a lot of attention of Oaklanders, and rightly so. And before we get into one other aspect, I want to start, first of all, how long did it take to produce this report, and what was the impetus of it?
Well, we started the report. We launched the report in, I believe it was actually my predecessor, Courtney Ruby, October 13th. And we issued it on the final day of April, so April 30th. So it's about 6 months. The process entails we have a really prescriptive process that is informed by government auditing standards. So all throughout, we were reaching out to the auditee, which in this case was the city administration, and conducting interviews and compiling all the records, some of which were featured in our appendices, or in that one appendix, Appendix A. So it took about 6 months, and the impetus really was of many things. The first being just an overwhelming, I guess, we were approached by so many people who expressed concern, bafflement at the fact that the city didn't successfully apply for this grant, with crime being at the forefront of a lot of Oaklanders' mind right at that time, and still actually today. And I mean, we just got so many requests from the public, and we also were requested by the city administrator to look into this. And from as a city auditor, we also have to weigh in risk, right? So
Yes.
we're not going to audit given that we have limited resources. We have a framework that considers risk, that considers the public facing, if something affects the public, right, or if something affects the city's financial resources. We consider all these things. And because this was something tied to public safety, it really rose to the top of our internal risk assessment as well. So
In the report, a paragraph just jumped out at me, so to the point where I highlighted it here for our discussion. One can see this at zenniereport.com under the title Oakland Auditor Points Grant Snafu at Mayor, and that either fair or unfair, but the title was the result of what I'm about to read, and I'll just for the viewer out there, I'll enlarge it and so that people can see it a bit better than initially, and then I'll move up to refocus on it, because it's really something that really points to the heart of what people have talked about in general, and it goes like this. The audit notes the application may have been submitted timely had the mayor exercised more leadership over the ORTP grant. While grant management is not necessarily the mayor's responsibility, as the mayor indicated in her State of City address, the mayor does have responsibility over the city administration. It is appropriate for the mayor or designee to seize control of important initiatives like the ORTP grant. Mayoral leadership would have eliminated any ambiguity about who is in charge. That is powerful. That just jumped out at me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. What was the mayor's response, if any, or would the interactions with the mayor's office lead to this conclusion? I'm curious.
Well, the response came from the city administration. It was more about the recommendations, right? So the response from the city administration was focused on those two recommendations, and I'm glad that they agreed to those. And one of the recommendations, the second one, the first one is about the grants management policy. The second one is about making sure that these kind of interdepartmental grants are that the city administration knows about them, and so
Are you
that
referring to the paragraph below?
oh, it's in the at the very end at the recommendations, right?
Oh,
But
right,
it's
right.
so their agreement to that, to me, is relevant to that paragraph that you just read. So basically, there's an executive sponsor. That's the term that we use in the audit and in that recommendation. Somebody of sufficient rank, of sufficient authority, and sufficient qualifications should be delegated by the city administrator or the mayor to make sure that that the grant application is carried out successfully. Right. So it's somebody. So if it's not the mayor specifically, then somebody delegated with sufficient authority, rank, and qualifications should make sure that it's carried out. So that paragraph, what we were just saying is that was a time in which there was interim leadership in the city, and the city administrator, the permanent city administrator that we currently have, didn't start until June.
Right.
So that was deep into this process. That person wasn't even in place. And we had interim police chief. We had interim economic workforce development department director. So in that environment, and if it was important enough to the city, right? So we're just calling out the fact that that kind of leadership needed to come from somewhere, and the mayor's the CEO of the organization, and therefore, ultimately, the mayor could have delegated someone.
How much of this is a problem of the individual mayor as opposed to structure? Here's what I'm getting at. I work for 2 mayors of Oakland, Elihu Harris and Jerry Brown. We had a council manager form of government, and now this structure. But I've noticed that on the average, the city administrator lasts maybe only 2 years, and there's a lot of loosey-goosey movement. How much of that structure is perhaps contributing to problems like this?
Interesting. I used to work at an agency that had a manager council form of government down in San Jose. I am not aware of if there's any kind of relationship between the tenure of a city manager or the chief operating officer of the city, and whether or not the council is the boss, or whether or not the individual mayor is the boss, or because I've seen that there could be turnover in city managers too. Yeah. I think Oakland was just fortunate for having some long-term city managers throughout its history. So well, I'm not,
if I may, because Elihu would always say, Zennie, I can count to 5. In other words, I need 5 council votes, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a process that one had to go through that doesn't exist today. The mayor is in charge, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah, that's why.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That would be an interesting, a whole new conversation that I haven't really had before.
And so, what would you like to see the mayor do? Because I know that the other paragraphs below pointed to, well, it's really a shared responsibility for the problem. But as Elihu would always say to me, why he wanted a council manager form of government to go away and why he wanted strong mayors, I want accountability at the top, which the current mayor said she wants as well. So now that the finger's pointed at her by this paragraph, what should the mayor do to assure that this doesn't happen again?
That's an interesting question. I think so. From the auditor's perspective, we made the recommendation about the grants, but it doesn't seem particularly exciting, right? You talk about policies and procedures, but we arrived at that recommendation because of what we saw during this audit. We saw that there was nothing written down, no prescriptive guidance for the different department directors to use to make sure that the process was successful. And then there was no obligation for anyone to there was no formal way to assign responsibility to any particular person, right? So I think that having having a structure whereby somebody is held accountable, somebody is the designated person to see the grant application process to completion, that's key. So like just having somebody be responsible. Oh, what are the things we have to do as part of this grant process? What are the key deadlines, right? Who's going to be responsible for completing those, right? When are we going to hit submit, right? All those things. There needs to be, somebody needs to be, if it's not necessarily the mayor or the city administrator, then somebody needs to be formally designated to do those things.
Any move as to a change that would assure that? Because this is not the first time this happened. This happened with a grant associated with Howard Terminal. We lost that grant too. I mean, that we didn't apply for it. We simply weren't selected. But because of the nature of the grant, not being focused on crime, it didn't get the headlines. Mm-hmm. So now here we are. What would you like to see the city do? Because I know something else. You noted that, if I'm not mistaken, it seems like the city isn't always applying the recommendations you make.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, we have an audit recommendation follow-up process. We hadn't previously reported back on the status of previous audit recommendations. So this is a new era for the city auditor's office. So, and this was the Measure X, the good governance charter amendment that was passed in late 2022. Yep. That requires the city auditor's office to provide semi-annual updates before the city council and the public, right, on the status of outstanding audit recommendations. And we look forward to doing that, because I think what that does is it forces the public conversation around it. So if I'm presenting to the city council and the public the status of all these open audit recommendations, then they're not forgotten about, right? Yeah. Internally within the city, I've also, we've developed a audit recommendation follow-up administrative instruction for the city administration to guide their implementation of the audit recommendations, and to guide their interaction with the city auditor's office in audits, right? So hopefully, just given the attention that our recommendations are going to be getting, we'll see some implementation of it. I think up until now, they just haven't been discussed in a public forum.
Oh, something else too, and it didn't jump out at me at your report, but commonly there's a project manager. There's one grants person, right? But it seemed like this is almost a village. But is that indicative of a problem where it's hard to say, okay, the project manager should have done A, B, C, D, and E? Just so curious.
I think that's an interesting way of putting it. When you said village, yeah, that's what we meant by the absent leadership, right? So we had in this situation multiple dedicated city employees who took the initiative to pursue this opportunity. Dedicated members of the community, people who aren't even paid by the city, were all in trying to get the city this grant. But that's not enough, right? Because ultimately, so it was like a village or by committee, right? Nobody was tasked with being in charge of making sure that the grant was going to be successfully applied to. So I think that is kind of a fair characterization.
Now, out of respect for my promise to hear your time frame, you get sworn in tomorrow.
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome to Oakland. How does it feel?
Oh, it feels good. This is important work that we're doing. This is challenging times, I think, that the city is in, but I look forward to doing this important work.
One question I'm dying to ask you before you leave. I have advocated to each and every auditor, and now you, to look at the Coliseum. How come no one has ever put the Coliseum, no auditor has ever put the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum Joint Powers Authority under a microscope?
Interesting. I'm not sure about why my predecessors hadn't looked into that. I could just tell you that there are so many things within the city of Oakland that warrant auditing. When we issued a survey to members of the public last summer, I mean, we had just so many different responses, so many different responses of issues of city programs and operations that warranted auditing. But we have, right now we have 6.5 people in the city auditor's office. And we don't have the resources.
Right.
I mean, we have high vacancies in the city of Oakland, right?
Right.
We have emergency response times that are an issue at the city of Oakland, emergency response more generally, right? We have potholes that people are concerned about. We have homelessness, which we have conducted 2 audits related to that issue. But I mean, we just don't have resources to audit everything that warrants auditing.
Yeah. And yet it'll be pretty high profile for one auditor to take on the question of why Oakland keeps losing its sports teams. You know.
Yeah, we welcome all the feedback from members of the public, including yourself, as to what issues they think warrant our attention. It's just that we get like literally dozens of
deluge.
Yeah. But we do want to hear from folks.
Are we better off as a city, in your opinion, now than we were 4 years ago, 8 years ago?
Interesting question. I think it would depend. And as an auditor, we are guided by criteria. So it depends on what you mean by better than, right? And
your choice. You're the boss. So you're the boss.
Well, I'm inclined to not answer that question. My answer would be, it really does depend on what you are basing ideal, what your ideal looks like. Is it, it really does depend. Right?
Yes. Well, on that note, I will close out and because your glasses are cooler than mine. So I'll welcome you back. Hey, thank you very much for the time. And hey, you don't have to move a muscle. Folks, thank you for watching. This is going to be on every platform. So you can look at it's already on Zennie62 blog.com and ZennieReport.com, among others. Congratulations, Auditor Houston.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the time. It's quite an honor. And that ends this stream, folks. Subscribe to Zennie62 on YouTube and bookmark ZennieReport.com. Thank you.